Kamala Harris won the presidential debate last Tuesday night, but will it make any difference to the outcome of the election? As news reaches us this morning of another assassination attempt on her opponent, Donald Trump. Back home, Labour prepares for its conference this coming weekend in Liverpool. Let's hope Keir Starmer has a decent suit to wear. The Tory leadership contest becomes from 5 to 4. And the Liberal Democrats came together for their first annual jamboree since their general election success back in July. We'll be discussing all this and more in the 50th episode. Yes, the 50th episode of the Downtown Den Politics Podcast.
Just looks like bigoted woman.
Me and my friends sort of used to run through the fields of wheat.
You turn if you want to. The ladies not for turning.
It will cost.
I know words, I have the best words, but there's no better word than stupid.
Well, I am delighted to be joined as ever by the dynamic duo that is Joe Phillips and Jim Hancock. I'm, of course, Frank McKenna, the Chief Executive Group Chairman of Downtown in Business. And we're going to start over the pond and in the United States with that presidential debate, which in one sense was as remarkable as the presidential debate between the previous Democratic candidate, Joe Biden, and Donald Trump. Biden obviously messed up royally during that particular conversation and had to subsequently step down. But Donald Trump's performance on Tuesday evening was equally, I can only say, nuts. Talking about domestic pets being eaten by illegal immigrants, got himself into an awful mess over the issue of abortion. He was absolutely all over the place and obviously got very wound up when Kamala Harris said people leave his rallies early because they're bored. I mean, that seems to be the thing that really, really did piss him off. And yet, all the polls afterwards, despite showing that she won that debate clearly, did the vice president, they're still tight. The national polls are still tight. And then this morning we learn of the second assassination attempt on Donald Trump, which he can only think would give him some additional, certainly press coverage, and then potentially some more support as well. Joe, let's get your thoughts on the debate first, and then we'll talk about this very sick culture within America of assassinations, guns, and whatever you think of Donald Trump, nobody wants to see the guy getting shot at every few weeks. So your thoughts on the debate first, Joe?
Well, first of all, let me show you my Black Dog t-shirt from Martha's Vineyard, which is in support of all the pets in Springfield, Ohio. I mean, if you put that on as a satire program, Spitting Image or something like that, people wouldn't broadcast it because they'd say this is nuts. I mean, Armando Iannucci could not have made up a character like Donald Trump. He just talks nonsense. I thought Kamala Harris was great because she managed to retain that twinkle in her eye, which Hillary Clinton never had. I think Bill had all the twinkles in the eyes in that family, but I think she was, because she I think because she was laughing at him without ridiculing him, sort of leaving the viewers to make their own mind. And that's what people like him hate. He's got a thin skin. He's absolutely obsessed with himself. He's a total narcissist, and he will not have liked it. But as you rightly say, Frank, it is still very, very close. And this assassination attempt, while he's playing golf, you sort of think, is that going to give him a boost? Is he going to appear with some mysterious bandage where he was missed at 300 meters by somebody? Or, does it give him an excuse to go, I can't do this anymore, I'm going to pull out? I don't know. I mean, the way that politics works in America, the fact that Donald Trump has got to the position that he's in, and the world, if you like, is holding its breath because the implications are huge for Ukraine, for NATO, for Gaza, all around the world. And yet we're watching this clown talk absolute nonsense. And the other thing that I found utterly shocking is that his running mate, JD Vance, said, yeah, I make up stories. It gives me media coverage. I mean, for heaven's sake, how can we take these people seriously?
Yeah, the polarization within American politics, Jim, was, I think, very evident during the course of that debate, where Trump was simply doubling down on some of these conspiracy theories. There was a documentary on this week that I know you wanted to reference, that I think evidenced very clearly where the American people are at this moment in time and how we've come to this point of having almost two nation states within the United States of America. I, over the weekend, for the first time, watched the movie Civil War and actually found it quite chilling, because you can imagine that sort of outcome happening in America. It's an incredible thing to say during our lifetime. But when you look at the debate last Tuesday evening, you look at the aftermath, where, to say, doubling down on his claims about pets being eaten, doubling down on Kamala Harris being a Marxist. I thought the other very worrying aspect of the debate was that he ruled out support in Ukraine, didn't he, did Trump? He basically conceded that if he becomes president, well, the war will be over, because he'll just say to Putin, you can have Ukraine. So all of those things rolled up together, Jim. We can have a laugh about Trump and his performances and the weird things he and his vice presidential running mate JD Vance say, but this guy's got a great chance of being in the White House again come January next year.
Yes, he does, because as Joe has already intimated, the economy is a very, very important factor with American voters, and they still, despite some figures to the contrary, feel inflation is still very much with them and is a product of the Biden administration. And that's going to be the big drag anchor on Kamala Harris, because in other respects, that debate last week, it was really compassion against nastiness writ large. Trump didn't seem to want to make any concessions to the opponent he was facing, and she was spelling out an agenda. We can say it's naive and vague and not well defined, but she came over as a compassionate person who's saying, I want to bring America together, and you can believe that she believes that, whereas Trump clearly believes that divisiveness is going to secure him victory. I think as far as the assassination attempt is concerned, two or three things. One is, obviously, the security forces are going to be under scrutiny again. You remember the last time it happened, the FBI director had to resign. But I'd have some sympathy for them. We're in an election camp. I mean, the golf thing is a particular thing. A golf course is a big area, and the surrounding boundaries are not easy to police all the time. But we're in a mobile election campaign where these people are moving from venue to venue, and it is very difficult to give them 100% protection. So there is that. I really don't think, Joe, that he's going to pull out. I mean, how would he, his whole thing in that throwing his fist at me instantly after being hit in the ear, fight, fight, fight. I mean, if he was to stand down, he would be giving way. So I don't think that's going to happen. I think, it possibly will give him a boost again. I mean, he of course, he got a bit of a boost after the last assassination attempt, but then Biden pulled out and Harris pulled ahead. So I think it still is very, very close. Now, moving on to the documentary, which I urge everybody to watch. It's on the BBC iPlayer. It was a BBC Three programme done by a very talented young journalist from Liverpool, Layla Wright. And it was with American women. She followed American women around who fully embraced the Trump agenda, fully embraced his views on abortion, and particularly believe in the, what can I call it, the traditional role of women. They were saying openly, our job is to obey our husbands and to live in the family. There's an extraordinary episode in the film where Layla had got into a family house, and the father was paying tribute to his young daughter who was present, 12, 13 years old, saying she's talented and all this sort of stuff. But then he saw her role in the future as a sort of housewife. I mean, it's just a complete negation of all the sort of feminist gains that have been made, and the gains that have been made for women over the last 100 years. But then they went down to the border, and these women were filming the immigrants coming in, and Layla said to the one woman, this person just wants some water. No water. She said, no water. So it's an excellent film, and Layla's a talented journalist working with Louis Theroux, actually, and I think she's got a great future. But the point, bringing it back to our conversation, where is Trump's support coming from? Well, it's coming from some unexpected sources, as well as sort of the normal people we sort of think of in the middle of America. It's coming from some of these women. We sort of think that Kamala Harris has won the women's vote because of her views on abortion, but that's not entirely the case, as Layla Wright's film shows. And of course, as we previously discussed, it's coming from some Hispanic and black voters as well. So I think it is still very, very tight.
That documentary, if anybody's interested in watching it, it's called America's New Female Right. It is, as Jim said, on the BBC iPlayer. Very well worth a watch. You've actually got females on there saying that feminism is the reason why the world's in such a mess. And actually, if women had never got the vote, we'd be in a much better place than we are now. So there you go. And that's coming from females, not from guys. And it was fascinating documentary, but for me, watching it subjectively, and it's difficult to do that because obviously we have politics that are progressive and we look at these things with our own bias. But when they were on the border, Jim, and Layla Wright was getting very upset and challenging the woman who was saying these people are illegal, they're coming in to destroy our country, we're not going to give them any assistance at all, and in fact all we want to do is run them out of the country back to where they come from, to use that old trope. And there was also, you can look at some of those people on the border at the wall. There was also a guy stopped in a car, a Venezuelan guy, who took off, did a runner. And if you were looking at that documentary as somebody who has got some sympathy with the anti-immigration movement, then I would suggest to you that you'd say, there you go, the woman's right. All these people flooding across the border, no checks, people just wandering into our country. This is the problem, Jim. Nobody's doing anything about it, and Trump will.
Yes, I have to accept that, and obviously we've got the problem, as we've seen vividly and tragically illustrated this weekend with ourselves, with the boat people coming across. This is a major challenge, and I have to accept what you say. I haven't seen a documentary made from the Farage point of view, if you want to say it like that, and possibly we need that as well. But I did think her treatment generally was fair. I mean, there's one point where one of the women explained how she'd come to her position, and it was because at school she had slightly different views, not extreme views, slightly different views from her classmates. But as soon as that became clear to them, she was sort of cancelled and ignored. And she therefore moved to her position. And I thought that was a fair exposition, that some of these people, the left have got no right to cancel right-wing people. We should listen to what they've got to say and certainly not bully them. And I thought that Layla allowed her to say that. But, overall, it was in the tradition of Channel, of the sort of the Channel 4 view about things, what's alleged to be the BBC view about things, a sort of to the left of centre in terms of this issue. I have to accept that, and we do need. There is GB News, which Joe is in a more authoritative position to speak about than myself, available to people to get another point of view. But, you know, sort of set piece documentary from that point of view would be, I'd have no problem with it at all.
We'll talk about GB News in the second part of the programme, Joe's latest appearance on it. Let's go back to the debate. And I said, will it make any difference? I was watching the Vox Pops afterwards, and there was a guy who said, and I quote, "Trump is deluded," when he was asked about his comment regarding the eating of cats and dogs in Springfield. This guy just said, "Oh, it's deluded. Trump's deluded." And then he went on to say, "But I'll be voting for it." And this is the point that Donald Trump has repeatedly and consistently made. And we treat him as a fool, and we say he's a buffoon, and we say he talks nonsense. But his political instinct is, I could go out into the streets of New York, shoot somebody, and these people would still support me. The only hope, I think, for the Democrats, Joe, is that there are more people who simply think we can't continue with this division. Because the other big problem, I think, for Kamala Harris, and Jim's already referenced it briefly, she's not got an answer on the economy. She was weak on that particular question. So if the economy, the cost of living crisis is the main issue, she will lose. If she can convince people, however, that we don't need the psychodrama, then she'll win. But when you've got people, as I say, saying the man's deluded and I'm still going to vote for him, difficult for me to get my head around that, really.
I know. And I think, you know, she has still got a mountain to climb. I was talking to some people over the weekend, actually. You know, if Biden hadn't stepped down and she hadn't sort of basically been crowned, you know, his successor as the candidate, and had to fight through the rough and tumble of selection process, we would have seen more of her. We would have known more about her. And to a certain extent, she's had a relatively easy ride because she's come in, she's fresh, she's competent, everybody's relieved it's not Biden. It's interesting the donations that have poured into the Democrat fund since that debate. I think it's also very significant that Dick Cheney said he's going to vote for Kamala Harris. I don't know, and I don't think anybody outside of American politics who really sort of understands how it works, because it's such a vast country, can understand, you know, do people see themselves as a divided country, as we do from looking from the outside? Or are they so insular in the fact that it's an enormous nation that actually they're only concerned about what's going on in their area? I mean, you know, I don't think we can comprehend it. They don't have a national newspaper like we have several of, you know, and they've got time differences. They've got all of those things. And the difference between, I don't know, Boston and Detroit are just so enormous. They might as well be different countries. So I think, you know, calling out for unity is great to a world stage, but is it actually going to work to people who have lost their jobs? They've seen industry go, you know, they've got the same problems that, you know, the rest of Europe's got, which is worries about the economy and all of those sort of things. In the end, you know, and I think in a way it comes back to what Jim was saying and more what you were saying, Frank, about the documentary. The way that Hillary Clinton lost was because she didn't recognize that there were people who felt that people like her weren't listening. And I think, you know, to a large extent, that's why we've seen the rise of reform in this country. You know, and it's very easy for people in the centre and people on the left to ridicule and to be slightly sort of voyeuristic, slightly sneery about people whose concerns are outside of, you know, our comfort zone, if you like. So I think Kamala Harris, she hasn't fallen into that Hillary Clinton trap, but she does need to do something to address the real concerns of working people. However, you know, the fact that she's got Black and young women and Hispanic voters supporting her, they are people who generally are at the bottom of the socioeconomic pile. and that will help. But they're going to have to work really hard to get every vote out.
Of course, she did secure the biggest prize that was on offer, and that is Taylor Swift's endorsement. And people might think, oh, it doesn't matter. Surely that doesn't matter. Celebrity endorsements, 10 a penny. An additional 300,000 people registered to vote once Taylor Swift posted that endorsement for Kamala Harris and wonderfully signed it off, childless cat lady. So we'll see. It's 300,000 votes. It's literally 300,000 votes that could swing the American election because of the way that strange electoral system works. So we will be coming back, no doubt, many times. There's 49 days to go now to the presidential election on November the 5th, and we'll discuss it much more, I'm sure, on our podcast. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we're coming back home, and we're going to be talking about Keir Starmer and Wardrobe Gate. We're going to discuss Mel Stride's defeat in the Tory party leadership election, meaning that both Jim and I, our candidates, our predictions have gone. So 4 remain, and we'll be looking at their chances, and we'll be talking about the Liberal Democrat conference, plus our memories of party conferences past. Jim goes back right to 1888, of course, so it should be an interesting recollection. Stay with us, we'll be back in a moment. Welcome back to the 50th episode of the Downtown Den Politics podcast with me, Frank McKenna, Joe Phillips and Jim Hancock. We talked all things America in the first part of this episode. We're now going to turn our attention to UK politics. We're right in the middle of conference season. The TUC conference has taken place. The Lib Dems met in unusual circumstances in a celebratory mood with 70-odd MPs in the room and Ed Davey water skiing in to the conference, continuing this thing of that he's sort of made a name for himself, hasn't he? These little stunts that he keeps pulling, but it does get attention. Then we've had more controversy over the Labour leadership and Keir Starmer and Lady Starmer receiving gifts in the way of clothing from one of the Labour donors, and the Conservative Party leadership race continues and continues and continues. So let's turn first to this latest controversy that the Labour Party faces. And Jim, I'll bring you in first. Wardrobe Gate, is this something Keir Starmer and co should be concerned about?
Yes, I mean, in the great scheme of things, it doesn't matter, obviously, with Ukraine and the economy and everything. Of course, it doesn't matter. On the other hand, some of these things do stick. And the proposition, asserted by others and then compounded by the Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, who I continue to have doubts about, saying that, he had to keep smart and this is why the money was paid. I mean, Sir Keir may have come from humble background when his father was a toolmaker, but he's acquired quite a lot of money since as a successful lawyer. And the idea that he needs public funds or a Labour Party donor to pay for his wardrobe is quite ridiculous. It's distracting. It's not in tune with Labour values. And it's a silly thing to happen just before the party conference, which, as we said before, should be and maybe a celebration of a huge victory, but already had its problems with this doom and gloom message from the Chancellor. And these little things blow up and irritate, and it's completely unnecessary. And it goes to what all three of us have said before. There's nobody taking a grip of the message here. They desperately need an Alistair Campbell figure to get a grip on it, to decide which policy announcements have priority and not to clash with other announcements like it did over the pay awards to the public sector and then the winter fuel allowance on the same day virtually, but also to stamp on these sort of things. It's badly needed, and unless they do get somebody to do that, I fear that these gaffes will continue, and it starts to wear away. Labour really need a couple of years with the public really behind them while they do take difficult decisions, absolutely, but they certainly don't need this.
Who's doing the politics is the question, isn't it? And this idea that, oh, well, the problem is he didn't declare them. Well, that's not the problem, actually.
No, exactly.
The problem is that you accepted that as a legitimate gift. And the easy spin, the easy lie for the next Prime Minister's questions is, so it's all right for you and your missus to get free clothing, but you're robbing pensioners of their winter fuel allowance. It's just nuts. It doesn't bear any semblance of common sense to me. And the other problem that he's got is that he's got his foreign secretary on the news round yesterday basically claiming poverty for the Prime Minister, say, oh, it's terrible because, if he was in another country, well, they get a clothing allowance. For fuck's sake. I was politician at a time when being suited and booted, if I can put it that way, was absolutely essential part of the job. I never remember anybody from Lancashire County Council saying to me, hey, Frank, do you know about that little kitty that we've got there where you can go and buy yourself a new suit, a new set of clobber, some decent shoes, and oh, if your missus has to go out with you as well, we got some dresses. I mean, Joe, what are they thinking?
I know. Well, I mean, apart from anything else, the idea, you might have a friend, a wealthy friend who says, look, you need to sharpen up. You need to go to a better tailor or a better dress shop or whatever. Why don't you go hither and yon? But, Keir Starmer and his wife, Lady Victoria, they're both working. They're both, relatively well off. They're certainly well off enough and certainly bright enough to be able to go and sort their own clothes out. And yes, of course, take a friend, get a personal shopper, but don't have somebody pay for it. It's absolutely unbelievable. And meanwhile, we're talking about this, and what slipped through the net on the news rounds over the weekend was, I can't remember who it was now, but one of the Tory candidates, I think that you two haven't backed, saying that, yes, they didn't mind taking the money from Frank Hester after he'd said what he said about Diane Abbott, and no, they wouldn't think twice about taking money from him again. Now, that should be the attack from Labour, but they're just playing into, the Tories haven't got anything to say, but they can keep saying hypocrisy, hypocrisy, hypocrisy. And you just think, who is running Labour comms? It's
and the whataboutery doesn't work, does it? You can't keep saying, well, listen, it wasn't that long ago when we were absolutely furious at the fact that Boris Johnson had somebody pay for the decor at Downing Street.
Well,
now, it was easy for the Prime Minister to say, listen, I have dignitaries coming to Downing Street, foreign leaders, business leaders, potential investors. I need my house to look the best that it can possibly. We wouldn't have accepted that as an excuse, Jim.
No.
So I can't see how we can accept as an excuse, well, Keir needs to look his best. I can't get my head around it.
Yeah, Labour should have been particularly acute to the danger of being accused of sleaze and that sort of thing, because that was one of the main things that brought the Tories down, and they needed to be as perfect as they could possibly be coming into office. And the thing is a lot of this is around Lord Ali. I think it is. He's a massive donor to the Labour Party for a long time. The Tory papers have been on his case ever since he was granted a pass temporarily to move around number 10. So they've obviously done more digging, and somebody should have been in there saying, "Look, Lord Ali, is there anything else we need to know?" And otherwise, this goes on and on. This is the thing. I mean, it is slightly resonant of Tony Blair's first mistake with Bernie Ecclestone, and that was the first sort of scandal to hit New Labour, which wasn't that long after they came into office. But Alistair Campbell was present, and it didn't dog the whole administration. So I think
it wasn't £1 million going into Tony Blair's bank account, Jim. It was £1 million donation to the Labour Party, which they gave back. Now, the reaction I would have had, if I'd have been Keir Starmer over the weekend, was, in hindsight, that was a bit of a mistake. So actually, 20 grand's worth of clothes, I'm going to take a loan out, I'm going to get the money back. And that should have been his reaction, not this nonsense of wheeling people out to say, oh, well, you know, he should get a clothing allowance. It's just, as I say, nobody doing the politics for them.
Well, and it's so insulting. You know, people who work in the health service, they don't have laundries anymore in hospitals. They have to take their uniforms home with them and wash them. You know, there are a whole question about, you know, bacteria and infections and things like that. But, you know, all of those things, we all have to get dressed for work, whatever we do. And if you've got somebody, I mean, what comes across to me is that this idea that either Starmer or Lady Starmer are incapable of sorting out their own clothes. And that is not the image that you want. You know.
Anyway, we've spent 7 or 8 minutes talking about this in the run-up to the Labour Party conference. I mean, what sort of? No, exactly. So, what sort of conference do we think it's going to be, Frank? I mean, a celebration, or is it going to be scratchy over the Chancellor's speech? Is clearly probably going to be more important than the Prime Minister's speech.
Yeah, well, that's on the Monday, and I think that she will have some good things and positive things to say. She's going to have to, and there are an awful lot of disgruntled MPs over the winter fuel allowance, even those who went through the lobby and voted for the measure, not particularly happy. They'll be even less happy given the coverage of what you're absolutely right in saying, Jim, relatively trivial, but these are the things that grab people's attention. They may be trivial to us, but you know, people will be talking about that in the pub and at the match rather than the fiscal rules. So I think Rachel's got a big job to do on Monday. I think she's going to have to come forward with, as I say, some positivity, a reason as to why this pain is happening now. What's the vision? Where are we heading for? What is the pain for? And then on Tuesday, Starmer has got to give a better speech than he gave last year. And it was an impressive performance last year. You remember he got the glitter thrown at him and he had to take his suit jacket off. I wonder how expensive that jacket was. So we'll all remember that. But no, they've got some real challenges this week because, you know, we've said this before, the electorate didn't necessarily love Labour. I'm not sure the party loves the Labour leadership, if truth be known. You know, is Keir Starmer seen as a means to an end rather than that hero that the Labour Party, they love their heroes, don't they? And he's not got that sort of persona, but he's got to do some big lifting next week, in my opinion. Joe, I don't know what you'd be saying to the Labour leadership in the run-up to this conference. It should be the most joyous of occasions, given the fact they're in government for the first time in 14 years, but it doesn't feel like that.
No, it doesn't. And I think, you know, for the reasons that we've all discussed over the last few weeks since the election. I mean, I don't think Tony Blair was loved by the Labour Party. You know, I think he had to fight. People could see that he was a winner, but I don't think he was loved in the same way. I mean, what they need to do at the conference is they need to bring out the people, you know, the people who speak to the people who go to conferences. And I don't just mean the media and people like Jim who can't get in because he's got a dodgy media history. But I think, you know, they're talking to the people at the conference, but they're also talking to us at home. They're talking to, you know, the newscasts and everything else. I mean, interestingly, the TUC conference barely got a mention, even though we previewed it slightly last time. But, you know, Keir Starmer made a speech and it sort of went away. There wasn't a battle. There's been some huffing and puffing from various people. Rachel Reeves, I think you're absolutely right. It's going to be what she says that counts. But they need to play the big hitters. They need to have, you know, Angela Rayner out there. They need to have Pat McFadden. They need to have, you know, the people who've got something, who remember what their roots are. And I think that's what seems to be lacking, that they've got this job. And God knows, I mean, all of a sudden you're in government and you think you're going to be able to focus on this. And then you've got riots and you've got to go to Berlin and then you've got to go to America and then you've got something else happening. There's no time to think. But that's all the more reason why it's absolutely, utterly essential that you have this rigid grip on messaging and controlling the message and controlling the story. You know, the fact that 5 weeks on, we're still talking about winter fuel allowance. And, you know, we're still talking about wardrobe gate. You know, we're not talking about the other things, the important things, what's happening to the justice system. You know, Starmer's meeting with Meloni in Italy about migration. You know, there's a whole load of other stuff that is not getting out there because they're allowing it to be covered by nonsense, and they need to have a really good grip on the conference comms, I think.
They haven't got the control of the narrative at the moment. Jim, I think it's also a big week for Yvette Cooper and Wes Streeting. They're going to have to lay out their reforms in their respective departments. Yvette is going to have to lay out her plan in terms of that immigration control and also, of course, prison reform. And then Wes has got this huge challenge of health reform, of course. I'm conscious of the time and know that you've got to dash off, continue your holiday season, which seems to go on forever and ever. So let's.
I'm going to the Appledore Book Festival, actually.
Yeah, right, bloody hell. Anyway, Tory party leadership, right?
Just one thing.
Very quickly, you're the one who's dragging this on now, James.
Two very quickly. Well, I know I'm making myself late, so it doesn't. It's my self-inflicted wound. Firstly, you're absolutely right. You know, for the first time in 14 years, what they say in Liverpool next week is hugely different from being in opposition. You know, every word we listen to, you're absolutely right to refer to what Cooper says and Streeting says as well. But just one. You have to excuse me, the historical reference. You raise a fascinating issue about the relationship between the Labour Party grassroots and its leaders. And I could go through the lot from Attlee, Gateskill, Wilson, Callaghan, Kinnock and Blair, and on to Starmer. And there's always this unease. Oh, well, he's not actually he's not a blood brother, but he's pragmatically the person we have to have in office. And the people they really love were Nara Bevan, Jeremy Corbyn, and now Angela Rayner. You know, those are the instinctive people that you know that the Labour grassroots love because they're socialists and they're working class and that sort of thing. It's a very interesting subject which we haven't got time for now, and I've forgotten what your question was. It's about the Tory leadership, was it?
It was. So
yes, right. Well,
I've been Patel's gone. That was my tip. You said Mel Stride would do better.
Mel Stride was my preference, but it was not. I didn't say he would get elected, but anyway, moving on. So we've now got.
Bloody hell, Joe! I'll tell you what, he'd have made a good politician. Never mind political journalist.
It's unbelievable, isn't it? Unbelievable.
Let's very quickly deal with this Tory contest because we could go through the four candidates, but I would say to you that it's still a case of the three guys now, isn't it? Cleverly, Jenrick, and Tugendhat trying to keep the woman off the final shortlist, because if Kemi Badenoch gets it to the final two, she'll win. The membership are clearly going to vote for Kemi Badenoch, and that's despite the fact that there may be some concerns about how this very ageing Tory membership views a black female. But all of the Conservative home polls and Spectator polls and others within the Tory family that have gone out to the membership and consulted with them, Kemi Badenoch is by far the candidate that the membership prefers. So will Jenrick, and I think it will be Jenrick if she is kept off the final two, be able to keep her off the ballot paper, Jim? That's the question in my view.
Well, this is a very fascinating question, because what you're suggesting, I mean, at the conference, are we going to have a clapometer? Because the reception that these four get from the audience, you know, I mean, Badenoch's, I mean, if there's a suspicion that she's going to be kept off by the MPs of the final selection, the Badenoch supporters will be raising the roof in applause for her at the end. And are we then saying where it's clear from vox pops that'll be done around the conference and a reception in the hall that the MPs are then going to defy that perception and keep her off the ballot? I mean, I by the way, I've been talking to some people over last week about when they've been going around the country doing these prolonged hustings, the fury of the Tory grassroots about two things. One is the behaviour of Tory MPs during the last Parliament, and secondly, the way in which the selection of candidates was deliberately held up so that the emergency procedure from central office could impose candidates, most obviously in Basildon, where the guy came down from the northeast and won by 20 votes because all the activists just refused to work. It could be a very interesting conference. I think there's going to be a lot of questioning about the whole structure of the Conservative Party from the grassroots, because they're normally very obedient. But if they're ever going to be disobedient, it's going to be at this conference. And combined with, them, if that's what they're going to do, expressing huge support for Kemi Badenoch, and then the MPs saying, no, we're going to keep her off the ballot. It bodes pretty. We think Labour have got some problems, but the Tories could potentially have real problems.
Now, the Tories are in the gutter at the moment. They've got a long way to come back, whatever Labour's up to at this moment in time. Joe, tell us about your performance on GB News with, was it Kwasi Kwarteng and Nigel Farage? You are a bugger for punishment, Joe.
I know. I tell you, I can't wait to come to Birmingham tomorrow to be amongst friends with you. Yes, Kwasi Kwarteng and Nigel Farage last week on GB News. And it was interesting, actually, because Kwasi Kwarteng, talking about Tory leadership, said that he thought that it would be a mistake for Kemi Badenoch to win. Actually, it would be much better to have somebody like Jenrick in right now, because they're not going to be the next prime minister. Probably they've just got to keep it going whilst the Tory party either decides whether it's going to go further right or further left, or just tear itself apart. And then come the next election in 4.5 years' time, you then have Kemi Badenoch, who would probably win. So I thought that was quite interesting. The other interesting thing that I thought, I do come away from those programmes, I have to say, quite stunned sometimes, that Nigel Farage thought the greatest thing for Donald Trump and the stamp of approval that came from Robert Kennedy Jr. And I said, but he's deluded. He's nuts. He's got a brain worm, and he's as weird as Trump and Vance and all the rest of it. And I said, well, what about Cheney? No, that doesn't count. This is the endorsement of the Kennedys for Trump. You think, no, it's not. I honestly, I tell you, I go into this parallel universe every now and again so I can bring it to you and you don't have to watch it.
Honestly, he's getting prosecuted for sawing off a shark's head or a whale's head.
I tell you what, this
Kennedy,
whole
not Nigel Farage. This is
this whole American election is.
There aren't any sharks off Clacton, I don't think.
I don't know, but
he wouldn't know, would he, Jim?
There's an awful lot of animals involved in this election campaign, and not all of them are being treated nicely. No, I think Nigel Farage is in America speaking at some right-wing conference somewhere.
Yeah, I think him and Liz Truss are in America more than they're in the UK at the moment. But anyway, let's move on to our memories. Let's go and reminisce. And Jim, conferences.
I thought we'd only got an hour, Frank.
Yeah, I know. We're only going to pick one highlight from conferences. This will be difficult for Jim, I guess. But of all the party conferences that you've covered over your last 120 years in journalism, Jim, what's your favourite moment?
Well, I started covering them in 1975, which was just after Mrs. Thatcher's first conference as leader of the opposition. And in fact, it was 50 years ago today that I first interviewed her when she was Shadow Environment Secretary, because the October 74 general election was underway. And I remember her waiting patiently for an excellent journalist of the Manchester Evening News called Norman Jackson to arrive. So that was her status at that time. So my favourite moment has to be Blackpool 1984. Neil Kinnock had become leader of the Labour Party and was in a wrestling match with Militant. And I was there for Piccadilly Radio, and we used to take our coverage of the conferences really seriously. We had an outside broadcast van parked in the Imperial Hotel car park, and it was a filthy evening. The conference had just ended. There'd been all sorts of wrangling on the conference floor, and I was in my conference van, and we had these posters up, Jim Hancock live from the Labour Party conference. Neil Kinnock came past and said to me, "I'm bloody glad somebody's alive here." It was an absolutely foul evening. It was just absolutely matched the mood, because the van was actually shaking in the wind, because it was one of those seafront evenings. But there are other memories as well. I mean, obviously, it was the same. Only a week later, I was down at Brighton when the IRA bomb went off, and about an hour after I'd left the hotel. Anyway, I'm sure Joe's got
Joe, your conference memories?
I mean, so many, and it's like watching your life play past, isn't it? Neil Kinnock singing, because he has got a wonderful voice, obviously being Welsh, rousing choruses in conference bars and things like that. I mean, some of the best memories, or the worst memories, if you like, are the hotel, the Nail and Rock at Blackpool, which is a favourite knot of many journalists who were at the bottom end of the bookings, when the ceiling fell down, leaving maggots on people's plates. And Kevin Maguire from the Mirror, he might have been at the Guardian at the time, and there were quite a lot of industrial correspondents there. And they looked at their breakfast covered in maggots, and somebody wrote about it in one of the little diary pieces. And the owners of this hotel threatened to sue. And all these journalists said, "Are you mad? There's about, half the world's press corps here, or the British press corps here. We were all there." I don't think so. My favourite memory, I think, personally, was doing a Labour conference in Oban. I used to do all the party conference coverage for BBC Scotland. So I'd gone up in July. It was glorious. Oban is beautiful. It was lovely. Found the hotel, looked across the sparkling water, went back in November or whenever it was. Tony Blair was leader of the Labour Party, Prime Minister. John Reid was Home Secretary. And the local police chief, I think, had spent many a winter evening watching an awful lot of CSI Miami. And she turned up in full riot gear and made us take absolutely everything apart on our outside broadcast truck, including microphones, cameras. It was tipping down with rain. And the Strathclyde police kept going, "We're so sorry, but it's her patch, it's her call." Special branch were going, "We're so sorry, but it's her call." I was so wet, so cold. And then we stayed in this absolutely bloody awful guest house where they very kindly unlocked the door for breakfast at 9 o'clock in the morning, and you were given your allotted number of cornflakes. And there's a bloke called Alan Cochrane, who's the political editor of the Times Scotland, and he's very dour and quite witty. And they put out, these little sachets of marmalade and jam and stuff like that. And he just said, "Oh, I see you've got a bee then." This one thing. But yes, I mean, I'm very glad I don't have to go to them anymore. But they make happy and sometimes memories that you don't want to relive.
Absolutely. Well, I have many memories of many conferences, most of them good. I do miss the old seaside resorts of Bournemouth, Blackpool and Brighton. I have to say, I always enjoyed going to conferences there, although the accommodation in Blackpool in particular left something to be desired, because it was in Lancashire and so we couldn't stay anywhere salubrious, otherwise we'd be headlines in Private Eye. But probably the most memorable was 99 in Brighton, for several reasons. The Monday evening I was fuming because Everton were playing Liverpool in an Anfield derby. I'd been invited to the corporate hospitality, but I was stuck in Brighton at the bloody Labour Party conference. And incredibly, Everton won the game 1-0. Doesn't happen often at Anfield. So I'm sat in Brighton at the bloody Labour conference, and Everton are on Sky Live, so I was at least able to see Kevin Campbell score the winning goal. And the following day, incredibly, because you will recall this was at the height of New Labour, so there were all sorts of celebrities in and around the place. I remember seeing Chris Eubank on the pier, and I'm walking past a restaurant and I looks around, this guy sure that's somebody. And it was Andy Gray, who used to, of course, be famous Everton footballer, Scotland's international, tremendous centre forward. And the day after this Derby game, so I sort of goes across to Andy Gray and says, "Oh, Andy, I'm an Evertonian." And we spent about half an hour over a coffee reminiscing about his football career in Everton Football Club. So it was nothing to do with politics, but that was a highlight of that particular conference. I have to say, you both referenced the fact that Tony Blair wasn't loved. I will push back a little on that, because I remember in '99, the Labour Party had transformed in terms of the people who were involved in it. And all the people who joined New Labour at that time, there was a mass movement of people who come into the party. They loved Tony Blair. They absolutely did. Now, I'm not suggesting that that continued post-Iraq war, but there was certainly a feeling in and around that time that Blair was a bit of a pop star. He was cool. He had the likes of Oasis, for example, backing him. He was able to ride on that crest of a wave of Britpop and all that sort of stuff, and Cool Britannia. I don't think that there's ever been as good a positive feeling around a Labour Party conference as there was in '99, and that was 2 years in to the government.
But no, I think you're absolutely right, Frank, but I don't think they loved him when he first
no, for sure, no.
Because,
no,
you know, and I think part of that is because of the sudden death of John Smith and all of those, you know, there's that sense of, oh, that's not how it was meant to go, and all of that.
Yeah, well, when he abolished Clause 4 at his first conference, that was quite tough. But I acknowledge that, Frank. There was a period he did have a late honeymoon.
Absolutely, and so for all those reasons, you know, '99 has. And many other memories as well, because there was a big contingent down from the northwest, regional officials and all that sort of. So we had a great time on the coast of Brighton. It did feel as though we were living in a very different time and a more progressive country, and the UK had sort of re-established itself by then as being a place where people wanted to come, wanted to visit, wanted to come and live and work, and our reputation was high in Europe. Seems very, very different now. And I'm looking, in one sense, I'm looking forward to the conference in Liverpool that starts on Sunday. But another part of me, I'm a little bit, you know, what's it going to be like? It's going to be an interesting one, I think.
As you reference football, I really must draw your attention to Wayne Rooney's great victory over league leaders Sunderland at Home Park on Saturday. It was an absolute thriller, one of the best matches I've ever seen. And as I've always said, Wayne's our man. Sorry.
Well, you know what? You've said that about James cleverly. You've said that about Mel Stride. I think, you know, Wayne Rooney probably be out next week on your betting slip. I would just say, Frank, you know, that feeling of hope. I was at that conference as well. That, you know, what we need is hope back in politics and the political machinery. And it doesn't matter what party you belong to, what party you support. We've got to have belief in democracy. And I think sometimes conferences can inspire people to go back with an energy. So let's hope that comes out of Liverpool. And let's see what happens when the Tories fall apart. I would just like to say that Ed Davey arriving by jet ski, whilst it might have got pictures, it doesn't sit very well with somebody who's campaigned about pollution in our waters. And speaking as a regular sea swimmer and sailor, I hate bloody jet skis. They're incredibly dangerous. They're completely pointless and they pollute water. So Ed Davey, not a good look as far as I'm concerned.
But not as bad a look as when Jeremy Thorpe used a hovercraft during, I think, the October 70th. And he arrived on this beach, and of course a hovercraft has this rubber skirt, and all the pebbles were thrown over all the holiday makers who were trying to enjoy themselves on the beach. So there is a precedent for an even worse
I know.
sea arrival.
And then there's rubber skirts, Jim, but I think that's another story.
Well, I think Jeremy Thorpe did far worse than the hovercraft when you look back at his political career. But
well, we're back to animals again.
Back
poor
to
animals.
The dog, of course. Yeah. Poor, as always, poor domestic pets, isn't it?
Yeah.
Although, as I say, Robert Kennedy apparently has done something to a whale or a shark or a anyway. Yes, in terms of the football, James, well, Everton sort of almost got there with history again, because we were the first team a couple of weeks ago to lose a 2-goal lead from the 87th minute and get beat 3-2. First team in Premier League history to do that. And then at the weekend, we took a 2-0 lead against Aston Villa, ended up losing the game 3-2, and we're only the second team in Premier League history to lose a 2-goal lead in 2 consecutive matches. Let's see if we can make it a hat-trick next weekend. Hey? Before we go, just a quick review and preview of some of the things happening at downtown. We had a fabulous City of Manchester Business Awards on Thursday evening. I was delighted that you could join us, Jim. And Lucy Meacock presented, the legend in this part of the world of the Northwest, from Granada Report. She was our MC for the evening, did a fabulous job, and congratulations to all of the winners, but in particular Phil Mayo, who won the Chief Executives Award. For Sender, 10 years in Manchester now, they won the Chairs Award, and I gave my Tony Award, that's the award that we present in memory of the great Tony Wilson, to Mike Henry. So congratulations to those three. A great night had by all. And Joe, you are joining me tomorrow in Birmingham, where yourself, Naomi Smith, who's the Chief Executive of Best for Britain, and Policy Director for the Tony Blair Institute, Ryan Wayne, will be discussing all things politics. I'm sure we'll get a bit more sense out of you and those two than we've got out of Jim and I today.
Yeah, I'll enjoy that in Birmingham. You'll enjoy that, Joe.
We'll enjoy it.
I'm looking forward to it.
So hope to see some of you tomorrow, and we've got our Birmingham Awards as well, a week on Friday. So very busy in the West Midlands. Lots of other things happening in downtown as well. Just go onto our website and look at the events section, and you'll see what we're up to. Listen, guys, it's been great to be joined by you both for our, and I'll say it again, 50th episode. And I'm sure next Monday morning we'll be able to discuss what Rachel Reeves is going to say at the conference, because these speeches are always very, very well trailed now, aren't they? So pick up a copy of the Sunday Times next week and we'll find out, I'm sure, a lot of what Rachel's going to be saying. Have a great week, everybody. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back again in 7 days' time, talking all things politics. Bye for now.